Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. Hello. My name is Hasan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 125. This is our big 125th episode. That means that we are 25 episodes away from 150 episodes, and that also means we're 75 episodes away from 200 episodes. I don't know what we're going to do for our 200th. We did a panel discussion for our 100th episode. I don't know what we'll do for our 200th, but we'll worry about that when we get there. And so with our book today, a book that is it's an extension of some of the information that we covered in the episode number 79, where we talked about Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee with D. Brown. This book that we are going to talk about today, and the individual who is talked about in this book, is, as it says on the back of the book, an iconic legend, particularly in American history, but also for all of our international listeners who may not know anything about American history, was very important to the settling and the resistance towards the settling of the American West. This book is written from the perspective of an individual 3 generations away from this iconic legend. And one of the things that jumped out to me today, and I'm going to talk with Tom about this today, it is an attempt to right the ship of legacy for not only this individual and not only for his family, but also to attempt to right the ship of legacy for future generations before time runs out. So the book that we will be covering today, and yes, we are recording this on Indigenous Peoples Day, or as some folks still know it in the United States, Columbus Day. So it's ironic that we are recording this today. The book that we will be covering is Sitting Bull, His Life and Legacy. See it on the video there, by Ernie LaPointe, the great-grandson, proved through genetic testing, by the way, in 2009, of Sitting Bull. And of course, today, we are going to be joined in our conversation around the legend of Sitting Bull and the life and legacy of Sitting Bull with our regular co-host, Tom Libby. How you doing, Tom?
I am doing fantastic today, Hasan.
All righty. So, you will be happy to know, by the way, that I did indeed, once I finished reading this book, I went and cross-referenced whatever D. Brown had been talking about.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's where the gaps are. And so we could talk about the gaps in D. Brown's sort of research, which Ernie LaPointe does address a little bit in here, but that's not really his main focus. So we could talk a little bit about that today. And of course, you know, what does it mean to have an oral tradition actually written down?
Yeah. There's another one too by Robert Utley that was decent as well. I don't know if I think that was printed in 2008 or something like that. There was a decent book as well. So between the 3, I think the 3 books paint a decent picture.
Yeah,
pretty well done picture.
And it's really hard to kind of get a hold around Sitting Bull for a whole variety of reasons. And I think it starts with understanding. I think it starts with understanding who Sitting Bull was and sort of how he earned his name. So I want to start with that because
His name is not Sitting Bull. that is not his what's the appropriate term? Is that his native name? I don't know what the appropriate term is there, because in African American culture we call it something else.
Yeah, so Sitting Bull, Sitting Bull is Sitting Bull is a translation, right? So his actual name, and again, part of it is because and this happens even today in translation. Like when you hear the words, lost in translation, there's a reason that phrase exists, because a lot of times there are either words or grammatical structure or just the ways in which we we talk just changes certain things. I was very adamant with my name that people didn't reverse it. So my name in my language, Kipuapita Takan, is legit, like literally eagle rising, and everybody wants to reverse it because the way that the English sentence structure is, they naturally want to say rising eagle, right? Like it's like a natural thing, and that's kind of happened a lot throughout history of the native. So you're right, his actual name is not Sitting Bull. That is an abbreviated, or what is the term I would use? Paraphrased, I guess. Like it's simplified version of his actual. And you can read the actual right out of the book, I would imagine. Or I don't know if you already know it, but
I didn't, and so getting the book and reading it, that was the first sort of leapfrog, I guess, I had to make over a number of different things in the book. But
how about his birth name? Because his birth name wasn't Sitting Bull either.
No, his birth name was not Sitting Bull.
And that's something that people don't understand about the Native American culture either, is that your name can change throughout your life, and it's usually dependent on something, again, on your birth. It's something that somebody in your family as an elder sees in the brand new baby, that some sort of spiritual component or physical characteristic or something like that they name the baby out of right out the gate. And then you develop into an individual, a person that they may rename you because that name doesn't apply anymore. Like the name doesn't, it's not relevant to you, or your personality traits or your accomplishments have given you a higher level of respect or a higher status symbol that requires a more appropriate name of sorts. So I don't know if you want to read them. I know his birth name is different than his name after his 10th or 14th. It's either 10th or 14th birthday where he was really recognized as becoming a man and that kind of stuff. So
let's get into that part, because that's sort of where I think we should start. So I'm going to pick up directly from Sitting Bull: His Life and Legacy by Ernie LaPointe. And I want to talk about the provenance of this book too, and sort of how it came about, because I think that's all very important for leaders to know. And of course, as usual, we will find the leadership lessons that are in this man's life. All right, from Sitting Bull: His Life and Legacy by Ernie LaPointe. The life of this Lakota sun dancer began back in 1831. This is when the Bad Bow Band of the Hunka tribe of the Tiatunwa Lakota Nation was camped on the banks of the Elk River, now known as the Yellowstone River in Montana. Tiatunwa means looking for a home site. These people travel over vast areas pursuing the buffalo and roaming freely through immense open territories. The whites mispronounced their name and called them Teton. The child was the second of 4 children born to her holy door woman and returns again, and was to be their only son. His older sister was Good Feather Woman, while his younger twin sisters were called Twin Woman and Brown Shawl Woman. Returns again was very proud of his newborn son and gave the infant his childhood name, Jumping Badger. In the Lakota culture, the young boy received his first name from something his father had seen or experienced. His adult name was given to acknowledge a noteworthy deed he accomplished in his adolescence or adulthood. Now, I'm going to make another point here, and then I'm going to skip to where he gets his name change. Jumping Badger was different from other boys his age. Where the others were adventurous, eager, and often reckless, Jumping Badger always held back, thinking before he leaped. If he had lived in this century, he would have been considered a gifted child and would have been praised for his self-discipline and for always analyzing everything before he acted. His own people, though, misunderstood, thinking his behavior was hesitant and feeble. They gave him a nickname. They started calling him Hunkesni. No, sorry, Hunkesni. Sorry, slow moving or weak. Now, in Lakota culture, when a boy reached a certain age, his father would approach either a brother or a brother-in-law. He would give this trusted man a gift and a filled pipe. Then the father would ask for his help in sharing with his son the Lakota way of being. Through example and stories, the uncle would show the boy how to be a man, a warrior, and a provider for his family. For a Lakota boy, while his father was a familiar figure for whom he might feel great affection, his uncle was an authority, a person to be respected and admired. A boy would listen to his uncle. Now I'm going to pause there. That's the first thing that jumped out to me, primarily because in our postmodern culture, one of the massive challenges we have with masculinity, and it is a gigantic challenge that no one wants to talk about, is we do not have any transitional traditions for young men. If you look at any traditional
rites of passage,
exactly. If you look at any traditional culture, particularly traditional religious cultures, I often think of Judaism, right?
Sure.
They're going to have, the what is it called? The word now I'm going to lose the word. But they're bat mitzvah. There you go. They're going to have a bat mitzvah or a bar mitzvah for bat mitzvahs for the girls. They're going to have a bar mitzvah. Well, even there, they're going to have a transitional ceremony for a young man. But in African American culture, in majority Caucasian culture, in particular in our postmodern times where we don't value tradition, we've abandoned these transitional steps. I mean, yes, you transition from high school to college, that's a major transition that a lot of people celebrate. But at the end of the day, for a young man, there's no markers, or there's very few in our society and culture. And that was one of the first things that jumped out to me about this book, and about the value in telling Sitting Bull's story and relating that story. And it describes in detail his transitional experience going from being a boy to being a man. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you before we really fully fall into this is, did you have a transitional experience in going from being a boy to being a man? And if you didn't, why didn't you? Because I didn't have one. My mom was just like, hey, congratulations, go pay your bills. Get out. No, I mean, that's terrible. It wasn't nearly like that. I shouldn't throw my mother under the bus like that. It wasn't nearly like that, but there were no significant markers to say you've hit this spot in the road. There were no benchmarks, as we say in sales, right? To say you've hit this spot and now you can go accomplish another goal. And for me, that's something that I've struggled with, or I did struggle with for a long time, even going into my adulthood.
So I want to clarify a couple things real quick before I answer the question. So number one, just as you read this, and just remember, Sitting Bull was Hunkpapa Sioux, or Lakota, right, rather. Sorry, it was a Sioux speaking tribal affiliation out in the western part of our country. So my people, where I come from, is in the Northeast. So my people would have been in southeastern Canada, northeastern United States, so Nova Scotia, along the Maine coastline down to about the northernmost part of Massachusetts, around Salisbury, Gloucester, that area. And so although there are some universal thinking, there's some universal kind of stereotypes that get thrown on us. There were actual cultural differences, right, between the Northeast here and the western part of the country.
Yeah.
Today, that gap has slowed or shrunken just because of the advent of modern technology. Like, we can see what's happening with our brothers and sisters out in the western part of the country very easily. We have the internet, things, and so on and so forth. All that being said, I also want to remind our listeners here that although when I was younger and born, And I was told very early on that I was Native, but my biological mother who raised me was not Native and did not subscribe to any of the culture or teachings as such. I didn't meet my biological father until I was 21 years old. And already knowing I was Native, I just started asking a bunch of questions about how, who, what, where, how, why, whatever. Like, what does this mean for me? So I've spent the last 30 years catching up, or at least I felt like I've been catching up over the last 30 years. Okay. So to answer your question now, so no, I didn't have any of that either. I didn't have any of that coming of age kind of situation in the traditional way. What I did have though was, and again, I have no problem throwing my biological mother under the bus. Your mom sounds like a wonderful human being, and I would encourage you not to do that, Hassan. And I have never met the woman, but she sounds, from what you've told me, very nice. Anyway, my biological mother, on the other hand, I actually remember the day to the day. I remember the actual day, and I won't bore everybody with the actual logistics. I will just tell you that I remember the day that I went into my mother and I asked her a question, and she had zero answer for me, and I had to go figure it out on my own, and I did. And once I figured it out on my own, I realized I didn't need her anymore. I was 11. So I was 11, just about turning 12. And I felt like I needed her for this particular thing. And again, I'm not going into logistics because you don't need it. And I also don't need listeners thinking it's a sob story. It's not, that's not the point of it. My point is that coming of age thing for me actually did happen, but not in a traditional sense. It was a very postmodern sense. Like it was a very thing where I went to her and I said, I need help. I was in charge of my brother and sister. My brother and sister were younger. I wasn't sure how to handle a particular situation. I went to her for help and guidance. She had no response and not even a care enough to try to help me find the right answer. So I felt like I had to figure it out on my own. I did. And once I did, and once I realized that what I learned and what I figured out was right enough, I'm just being very careful with my words here.
Absolutely, yes.
It was right enough that it wasn't that it made me able to move forward with my life. At that point, I literally stopped asking my biological mother for help. I stopped asking her for advice. I stopped asking her for guidance. She was of no use to me at that point, other than an adult body that I needed. And I did need her adulthood because I couldn't sign documents at that point.
Right. Yeah.
But when it meant taking my brother or sister to the doctor or understanding what their medical needs were, I literally just needed her there to sign the document at the end of the day. Otherwise, it was all on me.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, that. So again, that lack of transition, right? That lack of, and I think a lot of people, I don't think your story is unusual. I think a lot of people have that experience.
I agree.
I also think that a lot more people have that experience than what we actually want to acknowledge.
I agree with that too.
Because I don't think that, and now I'm going to particularly pick on America, I don't think that American culture has done a particularly great job of providing those markers for people because American culture didn't think you needed them overall. I also think that, well, traditionally there's a lot of weight put on Christianity and religion to kind of provide these markers and these pushes forward. And traditional Catholicism, Orthodox Protestantism will indeed do some of that. But at the end of the day, to your point, it's got to come from family. And I think this is reflected in Sitting Bull's story. It has to come from family. And what he says about, or what Ernie LaPointe says about the Lakota way of being. Through example and stories, the uncle would show the boy how to be a man, a warrior, and a provider for his family, which I found that to be interesting as well, because we don't actually talk a whole lot about extended family. Like I was raised by extended family, right? Like I grew up with my grandma. And so I was aware that, I was aware that there were other people other than just my mother and my father in the world. Right. And I think with the atomization and the individualization of American culture, a lot of people aren't getting that, right? They're getting it's mom and dad, the kids of this unit, and then they're cut off from the community, and then there's none of these transitions that take place. And so how do you navigate that, in a really, quite frankly, complicated environment? And I think that's why many families, one of the many reasons why families are floundering and have been for quite some time.
Well, and I think the other thing too, and this, we can talk about this probably all by itself, on this particular topic, because within one generation of parenting, I've seen just drastic differences. Like if you ask all of my kids are in their early 20s, right? Yeah. Actually, I lied. One of my sons is 29, but aside from him, they're all in their early 20s. And if you ask them what their childhood was like in the extended family sense, extended family to them did not stop at aunts, uncles, cousins. It wasn't a blood thing. It was more like, so like my son will be very quick to tell you the difference between today. Like if he was at a powwow when he was 5 or 6 or 7 years old, every single person on that field had something to say about what he could or couldn't do. Like whether they were blood family or not, if they were on the powwow field and he got yelled at by one of the elders, he was hesitant to come back to me to tell me what was going on, because he knew that if that was an elder that I respected and he did something to offend them or to hurt their feeling or whatever, or irritate them or whatever, that was going to be the end of his day. Like, like there was going to be some severe and swift and cruel punishment, because that's how he developed that understanding that the elders matter, right? Like, because he looks at kids showing up to powwows today, and our generation looking at these kids going, hey, don't do that, and the kid flipping us off, or the kid saying go F whatever. My son's sitting there going, oh my good Lord, I'd have been dead. Like I would have, somebody would have killed me if I did that. And that's one generation. He's only the one I'm talking about. My youngest son is only 25. Yeah. He's 25, and he noticed a dramatic difference between when, 20 years ago when he was 5 versus today, and a 5 or 6 year old. It's insane to him to see that difference. The whole "it takes a village to raise a child" is out the window, because you're not willing to have somebody else teach your child a lesson of right and wrong, because of why? Because I don't understand. Like if it's because you don't agree with their right and wrong, but that doesn't mean that you don't take it as an opportunity to teach your child that there's also a difference of opinions, and people that have different opinions than you still matter. There's other lessons to learn there. So I don't understand. I see it. My nephew has a daughter. She's almost 3 years old. And I see it even with him. And she was at my house yesterday, and she went to throw some little temper tantrum that 2.5-year-olds throw. And I went, oh, no, not in this house. And, my nephew's reaction was, oh my God, what's the matter? Are you all right? What are you thinking right now? She's 2.5. Just tell her to cut the crap. Well, you know what I mean? Like, don't.
So this is something that African Americans have long noted about, and I hate to do this to you folks, but I'm going to make a racial distinction here, that African Americans have noted about Caucasian parents. There are all kinds of things that they will do that are, quite frankly, racially and culturally based, that if the skin color were different, those kids wouldn't be getting away with it. They just wouldn't. Now, what's interesting is, as I've gotten older, I attribute that less to race and more to class, because I see classes of people doing different things regardless of race that other classes won't do regardless of race, right? Yeah. And so I don't know how I have no idea. I mean, to your point, like I have no idea how you preserve tradition and culture. Walking uphill against everything that you see in the dominant structure, right? Because to your, or maybe not to your point, but the fact is, like, all kids, regardless of ethnic or racial makeup, all have access to iPhones. They're all on the internet.
Yep.
And so the great flattening that occurred, or that began to occur in our generation, has just continued to steamroll, across the generations, which I think that's one of the reasons why Ernie LaPointe wrote this book, or maybe dictated this book, and I want to talk a little bit about that. But I also think that it's why he considered it to be very important to get this down, because there's something to be said for it being in the written word versus being in an oral tradition, because an oral tradition can just fritter away, as oral traditions, by the way, have done across the globe. Because once the people's voices are gone, then what is there left to say?
Right.
Okay, back to the book, back to Sitting Bull, His Life and Legacy. I want to pick up a little bit with earning his name. So and I'm going to refer to him as Sitting Bull just for the moment here. Well, Jumping Badger, actually. I'm going to do this. So Returns Again is Jumping Badger's father, and Returns Again approached his brother Four Horns. Four Horns took Jumping Badger underneath his wing at around 7 years old. And then Jumping Badger had a number of different experiences that demonstrated his compassion and his wise behavior, both with his peers and in the space of hunting, which was important to the Lakota, and in engaging with his mother, which I'm going to talk a little bit about the family structure here too, but engaging with his mother and his TP. By the way, Jumping Badger, later Sitting Bull, when he got married, I marked that chapter up extensively, and I was talking with my wife about it, and I said, this is why polygamy, regardless of culture, does not work. I don't care. I know you don't want to read the Yscoos, the Caucasian man's book, but read their book, because it doesn't work out in their book either. It doesn't work out. There's a reason for this. And so he's got this compassion, right? And he's got Jumping Bull, and he's got this compassion, he's got this generosity. And well, it's important how all this factors into getting his name. So in the chapter Earning His Name, it says this: Returns Again, Jumping Badger's father was a deeply spiritual man and had the ability to communicate with the four-legged. One time, around the time Jumping Badger killed his first buffalo, Returns Again was part of a scouting group looking for buffalo. The group had camped for the night when a big white buffalo bull suddenly appeared at the edge of the campfire. The scouting party was startled and they scattered, except for Returns Again. The buffalo bull reared up on its haunches and bellowed as he stomped down on his forehooves. He did this 4 times and then turned and disappeared into the night. The rest of the scouts returned to the fire, wondering about the reason the bull did this. Returns Again said the bull had come to give him a gift. The gift was 4 names the buffalo had bellowed. The first name was Tatanka Iotake. The second was Tatanka Ska. The third was Tatanka Wajila. The fourth was Tatanka Wiuha Naji. The names were Buffalo Bull Sits Down, Sitting Bull, Jumping Bull, One Bull, and Bull Stands with Crow. I'm sorry, with Cow, not Crow. Bull Stands with Cow. Returns Again told his friends this was a special blessing and a gift from the Buffalo Nation. And he took the first name for himself. He said, "From this day forward, I will be known as Tatanka Iotake." And so this is sort of how Jumping Badger sort of wandered. I shouldn't say wandered. Sort of this is the provenance. That's the term I'm looking for. The provenance of Sitting Bull's name. And he has to go through a series of trials in order to be recognized as a warrior. And he also has to, I won't say live in the shadow of his father, but he has to become more than what his father is. And he's going to do that in an interesting way. He's going to become a leader, right? He's going to become the leader of the Strong Heart Society. And he was elevated to a position in his 20s because of how he led, because of how he positioned himself. That was unusual for a young man of his age and experience. Now, there's a challenge here that allowed Tatanka Iyotake to develop a support system around him, and not really a challenge, but an opportunity that was given to allow him to develop a support system around him, and that is related here. So in the chapter that says jumping ball, and I'm going to quote directly from this. This will set up my next question here for Tom. In the late 1850s, an important event occurred in the family life of Tatanka Iyotake. The Strong Heart Society, traveling north of the Missouri River, encountered an Assiniboine camp. It was a single family camped on the riverbank, and the Strong Heart warriors surprised the family members. The family attempted to defend its camp, but was no match for the warriors, who wiped out the whole family except for one young boy. He was about 11 years old, still with only a child's bow and arrows. Even so, he kept attempting to shoot at the warriors. The warriors decided to wait for Tatanka Iyotake to arrive and let him decide the fate of this bold and desperate child. When Totake Iyotake arrived and dismounted his horse, the young Hohei seized his only chance to survive. He ran to the Strong Heart leader, embraced him around the waist, and pleaded with him, saying, "Big brother, save me." Though the boy could not have known it, he spoke directly to the heart of Tatanka Iyotake. He just finished mourning the death of his firstborn son. In addition, he himself was an only son. He did not have any younger brothers. Totake Iyotake told the warriors he wanted to spare the boy's life and that he wished to take him as his brother. Tatanka Iyotake's request to make the little Assiniboine his brother was brought in front of the elders, since it would require a Hunka ceremony. I'm going to struggle with words, folks. Sorry. The Hunka is one of the ceremonies associated with the gift of the sacred pipe. It allows Lakota men and women to create relationships with people not related to them by blood. The purpose of the Hunka is for the Lakota to make relatives among warring tribes, to eliminate wars and create peace among the nations. Because of this, it is a serious undertaking. Those who have a Hunka relationship have deliberately chosen to be responsible for each other. Their ties are deeper and even more important than the relationship between blood kin. The elders examined and debated the issue to make sure both Tatanka Iyotake and the young Assiniboine desired the Hunka. And so they go through the ceremony, and they become bonded together. Soon after this happens, Tatanka Iyotake's father passes away, and they engage in the ceremony of what's called the keeping of soul. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because we're talking initially about passages and transitions from childhood into adulthood. But then there's these other passages that are marked in Tatanka Iyotake's life that set him up for, well, I can't really tell if they set him up for future success or future failure. Like, I can't
actually, you could probably make the argument of both.
Okay, yeah. So that was that was sort of my question, is there's a sense of, and maybe it's because I know the history and I know what's going to happen next. Like, I know what the clearing at the end of this path is. And so I'm not coming to the material pure. I mean, we read Bury My Heart and Wounded Knee. We know what happens, right? But there's a sense of, I don't know, tragedy to these transitions. And is that something that, I don't know, is that the appropriate kind of sense to take from thinking about these transitions, or is there something more there?
I think it's a lot deeper than just simply success and failure, or tragedy, or comedy and tragedy. Yeah. So whatever, so the theater versions of it. But I think it's a lot deeper than that. I think that because there are there are versions of that ceremony that are throughout the country. I mean, they're called a little bit different depending on which tribal affiliation you're talking about, but the sentiment is always there. And just about every tribal affiliation across the continent has had some form of that ceremony. Mm-hmm. For me, that ceremony, I believe, goes way deep. It's almost like removing the barriers of emotion altogether from a person. So somebody, all right, I'll give you an example. Like you and I have known each other a couple of years.
Yeah.
The level and depth of which we've known each other has increased just through our interactions.
Right. Yeah.
If we ever got to a point where we wanted to go through this ceremony, then we would have to be willing to take down all of those emotional walls all at once, versus going through this over the course of however many years that you and I are going to be connected in this way, right? Whether, you and we've been going on 2-3 years at this point, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
So if some event or something pushes us together more rapidly, this particular case, it's the death of somebody. He does it later in life where he moves his entire village across the Canadian border, and he goes through a very similar circumstance with an enemy tribal affiliation that they were warring with for generations, but he goes through it with the leader of that group in order to essentially save his entire village in the move into Canada. I'm oversimplifying, folks. I understand. So if you've read the book, hopefully you don't you know what I'm trying to get at here. But it's these events in life that are catalysts for this particular ceremony. Those events matter. It's so in this particular case where you have a young boy who's essentially trying to save his own skin, but he's doing it in what we would consider the right way. To your point, he goes right to the person that they're thinking is the leader. I call you brother now at this point because I got nothing left. And now I expect, my expectation of you is different than what your expectation of me was when you first drove up, right? When you first rode up. So if you're looking, again, I take this back to our relationship and knowing each other for a few years. If some catalyst were to happen to push us closer together more rapidly, and we wanted to go through this ceremony, you would have to be willing, or we would have to be willing to allow all of those guards that we typically put up on a very regular basis, even with our own family, by the way. So you may want to go through this ceremony even with a cousin or an uncle or something like that, because you want the walls removed. You want the closeness to be more deeper than just superficial or just surface level. So it kind of goes back to I remember hearing when I was a kid, a lot of people talking about this thing like blood brothers, right? You cut each other open, you become blood brothers. And what does that mean in that sense? I have no idea, but I know what it means in our sense here as in the Native community. And I wouldn't just go do that with anybody. now knowing what I know, and forget all the bloodborne pathogens and all that other BS that can possibly happen. I understand that's a completely different conversation, but the reality of it is that is also the level of trust you're putting into that person if you're going through some of these ceremonies, and there are parts of the country that it's not a simple passing of a pipe. There are sacrifices of flesh, there are sacrifices of monetary values, and I don't mean literally you're handing somebody $100 bill. I'm talking about personal monetary values, whether it's your own. I think there was a part in Sitting Bull's life where his father gifted him a buffalo shield that was originally his. So, so that kind of rite of passage. I believe it was the same time frame that he gave him his first eagle feather. So, if I'm remembering correctly. So when I say monetary, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about personal monetization, where you're giving or gifting somebody something that's of extreme value to yourself. Giving somebody, if I were to give somebody one of my eagle feathers, I think that there would have to be something significant to happen for me to give one of those away. So so again, in these types of environments, if I'm going to go through that process, though, if I found somebody that I wanted to go through that ceremonial process with, giving up my eagle feather would be very easy for me to do.
Right.
That's kind of the point I'm trying to make here, that some of those guarded things, some of those things that you keep so close to the vest that you would prefer not anybody know them about you at all, those things go away when you go through these ceremonies. And both parties have to be willing and open to take the all the good with the bad, because it's not all just roses and rainbows and roses. You also take on some of the baggage for that person, and you share the pain of whatever's going through with that person's life and in future. Like, you take on a lot of future things. This is not a simple thing. I just want to really just try to emphasize to the people.
Yeah.
This is not a simple thing that you just pass the pipe, smoke the pipe, everybody's happy, and you go out, now we're brothers. No, it's not that simple. It's much more in depth than that. And you essentially make yourself extraordinarily vulnerable to that person. So you have to make sure you understand what you're getting yourself into before you say yes, on both parts, on both parties' sides.
So in thinking about these types of ceremonies, or these types of, not even the ceremonies, but these types of transitions, right? If you're going to engage in something like that, you have to mean it, and not only do you have to mean it, but you have to mean it at a level that is more than just a casual transactional level, right?
For sure.
This is not buying a pack of gum at the grocery store. This is not
it's also not borrowing a tool and never returning it, right? Like, neighbor, right. You might lend somebody a tool or money, and if you get it back, great, and if you don't, you're okay with it. You're not going to let it ruin your relationship, right?
Right.
It's way beyond that too. Like, it just goes way beyond the simplicity of what we're thinking.
It's the principle of family, but at an even more grounded level than that, because and English is terrible for these kinds of terms, for what it is that we're seeking to get. The thing I always say, and I don't, it's been a while since I've said it on this podcast, but we have one word for love in the English language, and yet that covers a multitude of sins, right? We have one word for family, and yet that's supposed to cover a multitude of meanings as well, and it doesn't, because it's hyper contextual, and it's hyper engaged, just as you just said.
That's why we add words to it, right? We have our family, we have our extended family, we have, like, we add words to it to try to make it mean other things.
Yeah, or not even just try to make it mean other things. Try to bolster it, try to give it some meat on those,
or better define it.
Or better define it, right? There's also this idea, and this is something that cuts through not only all of what Sitting Bull experienced, but it cuts through even what we read about in episode number 79 in Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. There's a sense of interweaving among native tribes and native tribal cultures that is sort of an anathema to people who are industrialized. Like, we live in an industrialized, we're post-industrialized culture, right? So scientific materialism, whether you like it or not, has won the day. And so and by the way, scientific materialism has won the day for a whole variety of really good reasons. Like, it gave us antibiotics and it gave us cell phones. And it's given us this ability to record this podcast. Now, the downside of that is it's also given us things like pornography and seed oils in all of our foods that make us fat and sick. Well, I'm just quoting my wife here because this is what she would say. And all these other negative things, right? Nuclear warfare, I mean, like, it's given us these are the downsides, right, of scientific materialism. But no one seriously, anyway. You have a lot of activists who will say a lot of things, but no one seriously is talking about regressing backwards to something that is, pre-modern, like deeply pre-modern.
We're all expecting some apocalyptic thing to happen to bring us there. We're not going to do it on purpose.
Yeah,
no one's going to do it on purpose. We're waiting for the left shoe to fall before we're just going to end up there.
Yeah,
and we're just hoping that enough people are ready for it and understand how to live through it that we survive.
Right, because we don't want to fully commit to the pre-modern thing because we know how hard, we recognize in our souls how hard it's going to be.
Exactly.
But the challenge or the struggle, and you see this not only in Ernie LaPointe's rendition of his great grandfather's life, but you see it in a lot of other different places in our culture. The fact of the matter is, we want to go back and get some of the traditions from those pre-modern places and bring them forward, and yet we can't, because the underpinnings, the things that allowed those traditions to exist have passed into history. And so maybe that's the touch of tragedy that I'm feeling, when I read this story, and I read how this is laid out for Sitting Bull. There's also a sense, and it's something else that I picked up from the book, and I want to talk about wives and children in a minute. We're gonna talk about that, and then we'll get into, I want to talk about his vision quest, which I made some notes on that, and talk about his first encounter with the Americans today. But one of the points that Ernie makes, and let me see if I marked it here. Let's see.
I almost did this podcast with Mike Astawi on too, by the way.
Oh, well, that'd be awesome.
I was going to wear it today.
There we go. That's awesome.
I was going to wear it, and then I decided, nah, everyone's seen me so far in my regular clothes. I'm just going to keep it simple.
Just keep it simple. Oh, where is it? Yeah, talked about enrollment. Hold on, I'm trying to find the point that he makes about the ancestors, because it's
Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, the Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us. That's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
Here we go. Yes, here we go. So it's at the end of the book. And LaPointe says this, and it's sort of in the afterword called Living the Legacy. And this was one of the things that jumped out at me, right? And he talks about sort of the reception that he has received from Standing Rock Reservation, which we talked about sort of the reservation, the challenges of reservations, to put it moderately, in American culture. And he talked about how he had submitted, Ernie did, an application for enrollment at Standing Rock in 1997, and then there was some dispute And it was not a dispute between Ernie and the federal government or something like that. It was a dispute between the standing reservation government, I guess, and Ernie, and talking about who Sitting Bull was and what he was. And it says here at the end, in those years, and I quote, that was when Ernie decided there would be no way to heal the anger at this time. He has said repeatedly that he is still open to any of the hostility, but it will require an apology for those who have wronged his great grandfather. When a Lakota takes the life of another Lakota, he is banished from the tribe. If this individual survives the elements and the four-legged, and he returns to the tribe, he returns with gifts to the family of the person he killed. He also will bring a bladder full of water because that is the amount of tears that will be shed. Then he takes the place of the person he killed, but he is also required to take care of his own family. What he did will create a difficult life for this individual for the rest of his life. Most people do not survive after they have been banished. In those years when the Lakota accepted the role of being Sioux Indians, as in the case of the betrayers of Tatanka and Totake, they were not banished. What they did is, this is it, they cursed their descendants. This curse is 4 generations long. Their descendants cannot perform the sacred ceremonies, nor have kanupa, that is wakan. It is simple to ask for forgiveness for what their ancestors did, yet they find it hard to do. Either these people do not know of this curse, or they are just ashamed of their ancestors. The spirits say these are the people with quote-unquote blood on their hands, and if they do not ask for forgiveness for their ancestors, after the 4th generation is gone, they cannot ever perform the sacred ceremonies. This is one of the reasons the Lakota culture will cease to exist. It has been said before the healing begins, you first have to feel the pain. And I wrote in the corner there, Jesus said, repent and be saved. Not, I'm just going to give you forgiveness. No. You got to repent first. And repenting is always about pain. But we'll leave that point aside for just a moment. This idea of, and it gets back to what we were talking about the binding of people together. It's not just the binding of the people together in one generation. We're talking about intergenerational ideals. Talk a little bit about that, because again, we don't have a conception of that. That blows away the postmodern mind, because we're individualistic. Along with being scientific materialists, we're individualistic. Like, I don't have any. Would it be nice if my mom clapped for me all the time? Or to your point, your mom? Sure, it would be nice. But at the end of the day, like, I'm an individual, right? Like, I got to be responsible for my family. And then when I'm dead and gone, that's it. Like, the door is just closed, right? I can do as much as I can possibly think of doing for my children in my time when I'm alive. But I know that in 2 generations, my name is going to fall out of their memory. And 4 generations, forget it. Like, I don't ever think about my great-great-grandfather. Like, never. And I know the person existed. I will be blunt, I don't even know his name. He was for sure a slave. Probably in the early 19th century. Probably somewhere in what at the time would have been the Kentucky, Ohio territory, probably somewhere there. But beyond that, at least on my father's side, on my mother's side, who knows? But I don't know that person's name. I have zero connection to them. So walk me through sort of how this works, because those bonds seem to be a lot tighter in not just in Lakota culture, but in Native American culture overall.
So I don't think what you're saying is far off in one sense, which is, it's not about, so for me, it's not about my name, right? Like, so generationally speaking, it's not about if we're taught that we are responsible for the next 7 generations, right? So we're taught that. So my responsibility goes deeper than to just my kids. It's their children's children's children, so on and so forth. So, but to your point, by the time that 4th generation pops up, they're not going to remember my name. I don't feel like that's as important as if they remember the teachings. That's more important to me than them remembering my name.
Okay.
So for it's kind of like, and I don't have grandkids yet, but to your point a few seconds ago, teaching your kids, it's not just about teaching your kids simply, it's about teaching your kids well enough that you feel let's bring it back to the leadership lessons from the great books here for a second, Asa.
Yeah.
It's not about teaching them this one, it's about training the trainer, right? You're essentially, so the way I look at my kids and my responsibility is to get them to the point where they can do these things so rhythmically, the muscle memory is so easy for them that it's going to be easy for them to teach the next generation to do the same things, right?
Okay. Yep.
Take a ceremony, for example, a particular ceremony that we find valuable. It's my responsibility to make sure that my children know that ceremony well enough to teach their next generation, so that that culture just doesn't, that ceremony will never die. I need to be able to go to my grave with a heart knowing that at least for the next 7 generations, that ceremony is not going to die. And if I do my job right, it's never going to die for an eternity, because my children will feel the same way I feel, which means the 7 generations from them will feel it, and so on and so forth, right? So it's a connection to the whole concept of it's not just about you. The whole individual thing, yes, I get it. Individually, it's up to me to learn it, but non-individually, it's also up to me to teach it.
Right.
So it's like, it's my responsibility as an individual to learn it. It's my responsibility as a community member to teach it. So that's where the separation actually happens. So again, going back to the whole train the trainer thing, if you're training somebody to the point where you want them to go and do a task, and you're teaching them how to pick this up and move it over here, and you feel comfortable that they get down the functionality of picking this up and moving it over here, and you're good with it, fine. Do you think they could train somebody? Maybe not, because they don't have the trainer mentality. Whatever excuse you give yourself in the back of your mind, well, that's the part that we want to train, right? We want to train the trainer because we want them and expect them to be teaching other people to do this. It goes beyond just yourself. And the difference in corporate America is you get paid to be a trainer. We're not paying you to teach the next 7 generations. That is a responsibility that you take on the day you're born, whether you like it or not.
Right.
That's just part of the cultural responsibility. Now, that being said, I guarantee you there are tribal members that walk away from that. They don't feel they're responsible. They don't feel the connection to the responsibility. Then they leave the reservation, or they leave their family units or they leave it up to somebody else, right? So I have 5 children. I guarantee you, I promise you, at least one of them don't care. They don't care about passing it along. They don't care about keeping it intact. At least one of them. I think there's 2 of them that absolutely care, and they take it beyond the sense of responsibility. They take it to the point where it's a part of who they are. Right. And then the other 2 are probably somewhere in between. They feel it. They're not sure about it yet. I think their minds will shift as they get a little older, or they start having kids or whatever. Something will happen that they'll decide one way or the other on what they're going to do. But I definitely have 2 that it is just part of their soul. It's part of their being. I can already see it in them. They already have. 2 of my kids have already been invited to do lectures at colleges. They've been invited. So I know that that's in them, that they want to be there, to be up front teaching people, and getting that level of in-depthness to move forward. So, it's a matter of, the way that we talk about it is just different than saying, oh, we have a family tradition that every year at Thanksgiving, Uncle Ronnie is going to carve the turkey.
Right. Yeah. It's deeper than that. Like I said, it's part of it. It follows the arc of the binding of a random person to you at a deeper level than just merely friendship. Like it follows the arc of all that. Like one thing layers into the other. And then it also tracks to what Ernie LaPointe is trying to do with talking about his great grandfather and laying out the truth behind the tradition, right? Laying out the truth as it has been dictated to him behind the legend, right, that has grown up around Sitting Bull, right? So one thing follows from another. It's not logically incoherent, nor is it inconsistent. It's sort of where you would wind up in a clearing at the end of the path, right? Like if you're going to go down that, there's a certain clearing you're just going to wind up at if you were committed to going down that path. So no, it doesn't sound odd to me. It doesn't ring false. It rings absolutely true. So let's talk a little bit about those generations and how you get them. Let's talk a little bit about wives and children. I got to admit, this chapter here made me crack up. It did, just for a whole variety of reasons, and I'm going to talk about them maybe a little bit here. Back to the book, back to Sitting Bull, His Life and Legacy by Ernie LaPointe. Totake showed a maturity and understanding of life that far exceeded other young men his age. His level of responsibility was also much higher. He was required to care for his people at many levels. His position also required him to make wise decisions on behalf of the group, and he's responsible for their overall well-being. That's leadership, by the way, folks. Totake needed the help of a wife to fulfill all the duties of caring for the people. As a result, he was married while still in his 20s. This was unusual for Lakota men of that time, since they did not consider marriage until a man was in his 30s or even his 40s. The woman he chose to become his wife was light hair. Now, just going to pause here for a second. I find it to be interesting that as a culture, we are transitioning to people getting married later and later, but not necessarily men, because men have always gotten married whenever they wanted to get married. That's not been a real thing. We're transitioning into women getting married later and later, which has interesting implications for childbearing and creating the next and fertility and creating the next generation. All right, back to the book. Living arrangements were made for married couple. Living arrangements for married couples among the Lakota were based on the fact that the women owned the teepee. Women were in charge of the shelter of their families and everything that went with that. Only if a woman asked a man for help could he take part in these tasks, and then he was limited to a few things, like helping put up the teepee or helping with such household chores as gathering wood or hauling water. When Totake and Lighthair married, she owned their home and she would be completely in charge of it. Pause for just a moment. That's feminism, by the way. That's even more important than voting.
We can get into the whole so most people don't realize that, again, they were a matriarchal society, except when it came to essentially one thing, which was war.
Right. Well, for very well, anyway. Yes. Yes. And that is something that jumped out to me, and I'll talk about that maybe in a little bit of your context here coming up. So Lighthair and Totake got married. Lighthair bore him his first child, a son. She did not survive the birth of her son. And then when a man with young children loses his wife, immediate family members among the Lakota would be there to help care for him and his children. Now, the whole village would come together to help take care of these children. And but that did not prevent the man from getting married again, and Totake did marry again, and he chose a woman named Snow on her. She bore him 2 daughters, many horses, born in 1865, and walks looking, born in 1868. Totake, a man who loved children, was very fond of his daughters. And now this is where then I started laughing. In 1866, he decided to take a second wife. He chose to marry Red Woman. And this is where I chuckled. It was one of the few times in his life that Totake made a mistake in judgment. The 2 women did not get along. Usually when a man chooses multiple wives, they were sisters so they could work together in harmony. The first wife, usually older, was senior and usually held a slightly higher position. Snow on her was not happy to have the assistance Red Woman could provide. Instead, she was extremely jealous of the new wife, especially since the 2 of them were the same age, reducing her natural authority over the other woman. Further, Totake seemed to show a marked preference for Red Woman's company. Snow on her became bitter and hostile. She caused great disturbances in camp with her anger towards Red Woman. And then I laughed at this one too. Her displays of emotion were most unseemly and shocking to everybody within the village. Instead of promoting her husband's position within the tribe and providing an example of a harmonious household, Snow on her caused considerable social disapproval. Totake, for all his peacemaking skills, was not able to curb this bad behavior by his wife. And to make matters worse, he really did prefer Red Woman. And I go back to my original assertion. This is why you don't get stop. One woman. One woman is enough. That's going to give you all of the challenges you could possibly need. And by the way, I've said this to Mormons. I've said this to traditional folks in other religious spaces that tend to favor polyamory or polygamy. Actually, not polyamory, sorry, polygamy. Muslims, it doesn't work. I've never heard of a time when this actually worked, when there's less conflict because you married multiple women. I've never heard of it. There's never been a time.
I got no opinion on this. No, I agree. I always go one step further in this, Hassan, too, which is like when you're married, like I don't even understand of having that, like the side piece, right? Like you're gonna cheat on your wife with some girl that nobody knows about, even if you're trying to hide it from your whole family, whatever. I have a hard enough time keeping one happy. Why would I want to multiply this? I don't understand why anybody thinks that they can get away with this to any kind of positive light. But now that being said, again, I'm not going to say anything bad or negative about my brothers and sisters out there in Lakota world. I think if that's the way they did it, that's the way they did it. And I do understand that there's, I understand. I don't know what I don't know. Let's put it that way.
Well, so I understand. I understand that I don't know what I don't know. And I've never heard of a time, because 2 things could be true at the same time. I've never heard of a time where it works out.
2 things can be true at the same time. Yes, I agree. Aside, even I think back in the think about before modern medicine, right? I would understand if you had a wife, you've tried to have children several times and she was never able to carry, you marry another woman that can have children and they're all okay with that. Okay, now you have children and now the whole house is responsible for raising those children. But again, that's a very particular circumstance. I don't know.
My name is Paul, and that sounds like a you problem. I will say this. I cannot conceive of a potential upside to any of this. It seems as though all of the challenges that you would have with authority, with understanding another person, with understanding the various intricacies of another person's emotional life, you compound these with marrying multiple women. And by the way, I'm talking from the man's perspective. From the woman's perspective, it's a problem too. Because really, how well can you know a dude? Like, I don't care how matriarchal your society is. Really, how well can you know a dude? Like, really? So, let's be real here. So, my observation of this is, yes, this was the time when he made a terrible mistake in judgment. Two, I guess at a cultural level why it was deemed necessary to sort of follow this path. But it doesn't seem as though he was browbeaten or forced into it. It seemed like he had choices and had options. And because he had choices and had options, he could have chosen to not, go down that road. And instead he chose the way of pain. Well, familial pain. And so from this, just to make it about leadership, this is it's something that I tell entrepreneurs, and Tom's heard me tell entrepreneurs this, and I even tell this to entrepreneurs who I meet in real life. You've got to, the only negotiation that you have to, actually not the first sale you have to make is a sale of your wife or your partner or whatever you've got going on in your house. Period. Full stop. If you don't make that sale, all the rest of the sales, you could become a billionaire. You could become, and I always pick on Elon because he's the most popular person right now. Elon Musk has been married. Has been married twice, I think, and has been in like 4 different relationships and has produced like 8 kids. And the man sleeps on the floor of the Tesla Gigafactory because he can't go home. How good a salesman could he be? Can't sell a woman? What? One of them? Not one? Right. So Tom's being conspicuously quiet on this. He's letting me talk, which is fine. He's letting me hang myself. That's fine. I'll do it. It's my podcast. Marry the one woman, the one time. Figure out your house first, and then you could be a better leader. That's my own.
What's next?
Tom goes suspiciously silent.
There's been, again, if you look in the course of history, again, from a cultural perspective, there's some things that happen that there's been, I've seen and heard of people taking multiple wives, but they're wives in the sense of visibility, but not relationship. What meaning? So like you go, something happens to your brother's, something happens to your brother, you adopt his family as yours. Technically, you marry his wife so that she becomes part of your family and you can take care of her. But there's nothing there. There's no physical relationship. There's no sexual tension. There's none of that. There's a level of responsibility that you have just adopted because of that, but that's where it ends, and that you do willingly because that's the honorable thing to do, to take your brother's family in and help them manage along. You got to remember, we're not talking about a time where the woman could just go, oh, I don't have a man anymore, I'll just go get my own job. And also, that's not how it worked. So somebody had to provide, somebody had to go out and provide meat and whatever.
She's running the teepee, though. Like, she's in charge of the teepee. You're going to tell me that doesn't?
Not in that sense. In those circumstances where you're adopting the family and because of a death, or because again, you read something earlier where if I killed somebody, now I'm going to be responsible for their family.
Right.
That there's no hierarchy there in wifehood. You're only married to one wife. You're married to the other family. So it's a different term. It's the same term, different definition, I guess, is the better way to say it. Okay. Now, in this particular case, again, I'm not defending Sitting Bull here. In this particular case, that was not the case. It was where he just felt like he wanted another wife. Whatever. And by the way, if he were alive today and we were to ask him, I'm not so sure he would say that it was one of his biggest mistakes. That might just be us judging him at this point. We don't know what Sitting Bull was thinking at that point. Okay,
you're right. We have no idea.
We cannot speak to the mental capacity of the person that's not in the room to defend himself.
Hey, sure. No,
we're stating opinion, not fact. I'm just saying.
I will grant you that. You're correct. We are stating opinion. We have no idea the facts of the case, but we do know what was actually done. Like, we do know,
and we do know how his great great grandson feels about it, because he wrote in the book saying it was one of his mistakes.
There you go. That's right. So
we'll take his word on that. How's that?
Yeah, there you go. Ernie has an opinion. Okay. You get your house in order, entrepreneurs. All right. Now, the other thing I like to focus on, because we have a limited amount of time left, and I would recommend getting this book, Sitting Bull, His Life and Legacy. Pick it up. It's like $15 on Amazon. I think I got it for like $7 or something, because I got it used. But pick it up, read it. I would encourage you to read it alongside Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, just to see the gaps between what D. Brown says about Sitting Bull and what Sitting Bull's great grandson actually says, about Sitting Bull. There are some interesting differences there. One of the requirements of a leader of the Lakota was to go on a what's called a Wiwong Wasipi, which is a gazing at the sun as you dance, or abbreviated for white culture, a sun dance. This is a powerful ceremony that's similar to, I used the term already, Vision Quest. That's sort of where my brain went. One of the things that I noted was there's no psychedelics attached to this. However, there are, again, benchmarks, right? That move you forward in the ceremony and tell you where you are and what you are doing. And so Totake Totake made a commitment to perform this ceremony. To do this, he first performed, by the way, this is from the book, Sitting Bull by Ernie LaPointe. To do this, he first performed the inipi, the sweat lodge ceremony used to purify the soul. Then he undertook I'm not going to be able to pronounce that, crying for a vision through the night, or vision quest, seeking guidance from the spirits. And then once he did that, then he went on into the Wiwong Wasipi ceremony, which is a ceremony an individual performs for the health and welfare of the people. It is also a fertility ceremony for the continued existence of the nation. The pledger dances while staring at the sun and offering prayers through the eagle bone whistle. Now, I highlighted the steps in the ceremony, and there are about 6 or 7 steps in the ceremony, which were all very interesting to me. And towards the end of it, it frames it out this way. The pledger, and that would be Totake Totake, commits to extensive suffering for his people and allows his upper body flesh to be pierced by sharpened bones or sticks. The piercing bones are attached to leather ropes that are connected to buffalo skulls that the pledger will drag around the circular arena, or they may be attached to the Wiwong Wasipi pole that is in the center of the grounds. In either case, the dancer gazes into the sun, blowing on an eagle bone whistle, and pulls against the piercing bones until they tear free from his skin. Totake Totake committed to be pierced on his back and chest and to be suspended above the ground, hanging by the skewers that impaled him. The pain was tremendous, and he went into a shock-induced trance state. In this trance, he envisioned himself as a young boy resting by a tree. And then it talks about the vision that he said that he had, including
the grasshoppers falling from the sky.
Yes, the grasshoppers falling from the sky. Exactly. Yep. And then at the end, when he had finished, the Wakasa Wakan said, "Your honor is great, but your responsibilities are greater." And that was sort of the big thing that he pulled from his ceremony, that his responsibilities to his people would be great, would be even greater than his honor. And it is from that chapter then forward that we talk about, or Ernie talks about, encountering the Americans, Arrow Creek, broken promises, the Battle of the Greasy Grass, which is also known as Little Bighorn, right, with long hair Custer, and then moving into military custody and dealing with the Canadians. This is where the long downhill slide begins for the Lakota people. And I don't think I'm being too dramatic when I say downhill slide.
Well, some would argue that the downhill slide hasn't stopped yet.
Yeah. I mean, I could definitely. I would definitely.
Most people don't realize,
agree with that argument. Yeah.
Most people don't realize that if you took the Pine Ridge Reservation and you put it anywhere else on the planet, it would be considered a third world country.
Right.
The level of poverty and everything else that goes along with it. Most people don't have a concept of that within the United States. They think of, if you live in the United States, you're doing okay. You may not be great, you may not be rich, you may not be wealthy, but you can at least survive on under some sense of normalcy, and not have to, kick and scream and fight on a daily basis for your own existence. In the Pine Ridge Reservation, there's a lot of people that feel like that is their struggle every day.
So I am, well, let's do this. So, because we only have 4 minutes left, because I've got an appointment and you've got things you got to do, and this is a much longer conversation, which we're going to pick up a part 2 of this, because there's other things I want to talk about this. Because we barely touched on the surface of all of this. So walk me through the reason for, let's introduce this idea, the reason for the rejection of Sitting Bull by certain individuals in the Lakota nation. Like, what is the reason for that? Because Ernie lays out some things in here, but he's not very clear. He does talk about the 2009 DNA testing that proves that he is the great grandson of Sitting Bull. I do recall when we were talking about Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, you talked about the identification situation with Native Americans and tribal identification, and sort of how if the federal government says you're this thing, I believe this was the point you were making, if the federal government says this thing, but the tribe says that thing, what the tribe says goes. Is that correct?
I mean, for the most part. The other thing too, it's not even, it's a little even less complicated than that. So the government, they don't really care. The government doesn't care one way or the other, honestly.
Right. Okay.
They essentially leave it to the tribal governments to determine their membership or roles, right, their population, right?
Population, yeah. Okay.
So, but the way in which the federal government kind of gets involved in this is saying, you as a tribal people have this allotment of land. Mm-hmm. It's going to be divided equally amongst your people. Mm-hmm. Each family is going to have a certain parcel. So, and what we have, try to think of it on a smaller scale. Think of it as like say you have 2 acres of land in your home, and you have 4 kids that live on it. You die. Now you want to leave the 2 acres, a half an acre each to your kids. Now they have kids, and they're leaving their half an acre to 2 kids. So now each one of them have 2 and so on and so on and so forth. So now if you have not had anything to do with this tribal affiliation for 3, 4, 5, 6 generations, and now all of a sudden you're trying to claim ownership to your tribal affiliation. Now the tribal affiliation government has to look at this and go, we let them in, whatever family they belong to gets diluted.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So essentially the way that the US government gives the power to the tribal government to determine who their population is, they do that in a way that makes it not advantageous for them to open up the doors for people. Which just so our listeners here understand this, mm-hmm. I am fully qualified, and I can prove without a doubt my tribal affiliation. I can actually go to our tribal government and get that tribal card recognition. I choose not to, because I think it's an atrocity the way that the federal government has allowed or has implemented a process in which we alienate our own people just for benefit of the people that are on the reservation, right?
Yeah.
So in one sense, the tribal government looks like they're, from the inside looking out, it looks like the tribal government is trying to protect their own. From the outside looking in, it looks like the tribal government is trying to gatekeep something they don't need to gatekeep. Because I'm not looking to take land from our people. I'm not looking. I don't want. I own a house. I'm sitting in my house. I own 2 acres of land right now. I don't need our tribal land for me to survive. But it's up to the. But because the way the federal government writes those treaties, they're required by their tribal government to allot me something that I don't need. And then the U.S. government won't let them change those parameters. So again, until we're allowed to govern ourselves in a way that makes sense for our people, then I'm not going to bother with that tribal recognition at all. I don't. Yeah. I know who I am. I don't need the federal government or anybody else to tell me who I am. And I think that's part of what Ernie's talking about, at least from his perspective. And he has DNA evidence that he's actually a direct descendant. I don't understand how you can dispute that, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. Now, that being said, whether or not Sitting Bull's descendants should be allowed in, that's a tribal government issue. That's not my issue to fight. So whether he should or should not have been allowed in based on who Sitting Bull was, what his actions were, how he treated the tribal government, all that stuff, that is a completely different and separate issue. Because that is something that could be a determining factor on whether or not if your family was basically disowned by the tribal government, then you're not being allowed in for a reason. There's not a lot you can do about that. But I couldn't fathom a reason why Sitting Bull would be excommunicated for, anyway, but.
Well, we're going to revisit this because we didn't even get into the leadership lessons from Sitting Bull, which I wanted to get into as well. And unfortunately, tragically, we have run out of time today. So we're going to pick up part 2 of this, probably be episode 126. So we're going to pick up part 2 of this. So look for that coming in the next couple of weeks. But for the moment, this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. And Tom and I, well, we're out.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.